This Mother's Day, celebrate the woman who's been there through it all with Pandora Jewelry. Choose jewelry that reflects the love you share and the moments that matter most. Make it even more meaningful with engraving, a name, a date, or a message just for her. Because the best Mother's Day gift says more than I love you. It says, I see you. Find the perfect Mother's Day gift at your local Pandora store or tap the banner.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. My apologies for not having an episode up last week. If you follow us over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn, I did post a story over there giving you all a heads up about it, as just before and all over Easter I was really poorly and I basically lost my voice. Thankfully, I'm feeling much better now and I'm ready to delve into today's case with yous. This case follows a man who was dubbed the Black Widower. A man who targeted women from all around the globe with intentions to kill them for profit. This is the case of Malcolm Webster. Claire Jennifer Morris was born on the 26th of December 1961, Boxing Day. She sadly lost her dad at a very young age, and so growing up there was just Claire, her mother Betty, who worked as a nurse, and then her younger brother Peter. The three were an incredibly close family who genuinely enjoyed spending time together, being in each other's company. Peter would describe Claire as a loving sister. Claire admired her mother so much that she wanted to be just like her, and Betty was overjoyed to learn that her daughter was going to university to become a nurse herself. Claire was the perfect person for this type of job. She was attentive, she was caring, compassionate, and this career path became the focal point in her life. She was so very passionate, determined to do well, and dedicated to her studies. When she was 27-year-old, Claire attended a party, and that is where she met Malcolm Webster. Malcolm John Webster was born in Wandsworth, London on the 18th of April 1959. His father, Alexander, was a detective chief superintendent for the Met Police. He was the head of the fraud department, and his mother, Odette, was a qualified nurse. Both of his parents having really good jobs meant that Malcolm was raised living a considerably comfortable life. He was part of a stable home and he had a good family. Malcolm went to private school, although he left there with little to no qualifications. Throughout his early life, he picked up several jobs. He worked as a bin man at one time, he worked as a driver, he dabbled in some corporate and some office work until he eventually decided to go to university where he would become a qualified nurse. Likely their shared career path was something that Claire and Malcolm bonded over. He would be described as cheeky, charming, energetic, funny. He had a great sense of humour, but he was also intelligent and appeared to be the perfect gentleman. Claire took to Malcolm straight away, and shortly after their first meeting, the two were dating. Being the family-oriented person that she was, Claire introduced Malcolm to Betty and Peter, who probably sized him up, and he soon got the stamp of approval. At this time, Claire was living in Kent, and when Malcolm suggested the idea of packing up all their things and moving up to Scotland, she decided to go for it. Claire was so besotted and just fully taken with Malcolm that she probably would have followed him anywhere he wanted to go. He managed to find work within Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, and Claire continued her studies. On the 3rd of September 1993, 31-year-old Claire married 33-year-old Malcolm. She was walked down the aisle and given away by her proud brother Peter, and it was the best day, a day where the couple devoted their lives to each other in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. Claire considered herself to be one of the lucky ones. She had found the man of her dreams, someone who was always going to be there for her, someone who promised to always look after her and take care of her. She was marrying her best friend, and she was just described as beaming the entire day. For Claire, this was the start of the rest of their life, and she was so excited for what was to come. For Malcolm, however, this was merely a phase, a stepping stone of a much bigger, sinister, perverse plan. The newlyweds settled in Tarvez, a small village sort of between Aberdeen and Peterhead, right up in the north of Scotland. I've heard that the first few months and maybe even year of marriage can be really, really difficult, but that wasn't the case for Claire and Malcolm. If anything, their life only got better. Malcolm showered Claire in expensive gifts. She had a constant rotation of fresh blooming flowers. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and made Claire feel how she described as complete. Just a few weeks after their wedding, however, Claire started coming over feeling really poorly. She was often fatigued, really, really tired, which left her sometimes sleeping for hours on end, and then when she awoke, she would suffer with headaches and intense migraines. She became more dazed and weak, and off the back of her qualified nurse husband's advice, Claire just kept hydrated. She kept down in the fluids that Malcolm often regularly brought her, appearing to be a helpful, concerned husband. Unbeknownst to Claire, that was purely Malcolm's mask, and it was him, the man that she trusted more than anyone else, who was making her poorly. The drug temazepam is a drug that can be prescribed to someone to help with severe insomnia. It helps the person taking it fall asleep quicker by slowing down their brain activity, which can invoke relaxation and, in more severe cases, sedation. So, using temazepam, which it's believed that he stole from the hospital that he worked within, Malcolm would spike Claire. He would crush down the pills and poison her food and stir it into her drinks. This is the drug that is making her increasingly ill. On the 27th of May 1994, Malcolm told Claire that he had some papers or something like that he needed to give his boss back at the hospital, and he asked his wife if she wanted to tag along for the car journey, to which she said yes. The couple climbed into their Jeep and began driving through the Aberdeenshire countryside. This is where a drugged Claire became incapacitated in the car. Once she was passed out, Malcolm drove the Jeep off the road, down an embankment and into a tree. He then got out the car and doused it in petrol. A source stated that he then set the car on fire, trapping Claire inside. She is completely knocked out from the drug and strapped into her seat, so even if she did awaken, she probably would have been too dazed or confused to realise what was going on, too hazy to think about unclipping herself, opening the door and then escaping the flames. Another source stated that after the quote-unquote crash, some people driving past actually saw Malcolm, who appeared to be in a confused, distressed state. They offered to help him, and he made absolutely no mention of anyone else being inside the car until it combusted into flames. So what's not entirely clear is when the car burst into flames, but what is clear is that it did, and that Claire was stuck inside. The fire was so ferocious thanks to the accelerant that the firemen who were dispatched to the scene saw it from miles away, the hot flames flickering to 30 feet tall, and they said it was, quote, the most intense fire they had ever seen. Malcolm was whisked away in an ambulance where firemen on the scene tried tackling the blaze. Peter described one of the men, a very brave firefighter, trying to retrieve Claire. It was clear that anyone who was sat inside that car was going to be dead. no one would have been able to survive those flames. But this fireman wanted to retrieve as much of Claire's body as he could before she was basically cremated. Claire's skull had fused to the headrest of her seat and her thighs with the portion of the seat that she was sat on. The way that it was described was as if there wasn't much left of Claire's body to retrieve, but they got what they could, and thankfully so, because this plays a huge part later in the case. Malcolm was soon discharged from the hospital with basically no injuries. He was interviewed by the police, who, of course, wanted to get to the bottom of what had happened, and Malcolm played his part exceptionally. There was no doubt in the officer's mind that this man in front of them was a devastated, grieving husband. He gave an Oscar-worthy performance. Malcolm explained to the officers that he and Claire were out driving along the road when a motorbike was coming towards them at a really high speed, and so in a panic he turned the steering wheel quickly, swerving out of the biker's way, and that the car went down the embankment, collided with the tree, and that he had tried to get Claire out of the car, but the door was jammed shut. He couldn't get it open. He made no mention of Claire being asleep or incapacitated or anything like that, so he gave no reason why Claire couldn't just climb over to his seat and come out the driver's side door. He said the next thing that he knew after trying to open the apparent jammed door was that the car was engulfed in flames, and that he looked on in absolute horror at the scene where his wife was burning to death. Bear that in mind. Claire was incapacitated by the temazepam, but was still very much alive. When the fire exploded, she was physically burned to death, which is absolutely barbaric and horrific. The fact that Malcolm didn't tell other people at the scene that his wife was in the car before it burst into flames was wrought off by the fact that he too had just been in a car accident, and maybe he had got a concussion, or maybe he was just confused. His lack of telling anyone about Claire in the car was written off as an honest mistake. People at the scene did show concern for Malcolm's story, the believability of it, which is something that we will delve into later, but all that I'm going to say now is that if the concerns were listened to properly, or maybe even properly expressed, then maybe more investigation would have been done, and this is where today's case likely would have ended. Instead of writing off the fire as breaking out as a result of a spark from the engine, they would have noticed that the Jeep had been doused in petrol, that's what accelerated the fire, and that isn't something that happens as part of an accidental crash. The car didn't pour petrol all over itself. That was someone incinerating a crime scene.
With Plan B emergency contraception, we're in control of our future. It's backup birth control you take after unprotected sex that helps prevent pregnancy before it starts. It works by temporarily delaying ovulation, and it won't impact your future fertility. Plan B is available in all 50 U.S. states at all major retailers near you, with no ID, prescription, or age requirement needed. Together, we've got this. Follow Plan B on Insta at Plan B One Step to learn more. Use as directed.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Following the death of his wife of 8 months, Malcolm Webster cashed in on her life insurance policy. Shortly after their wedding, he and Claire had both taken policies out on each other, which, I don't know, that's probably a normal thing to do. He was paid out about £200,000, which with inflation is close to $500,000 a day. With this money over the next several years, Malcolm would be living the life of Riley. He bought himself a fancy new Range Range Rover, and even a yacht. He justified buying the yacht, saying that it was a dream of his and Claire's to own one. For him, his evil plan had come to fruition. He had successfully enchanted Claire, married her, murdered her, gotten away with it, and now he was enjoying himself with her life insurance money. No one ever suspected that Claire's death was anything other than accidental, and for a period of time, Malcolm stayed in touch with Betty and Peter Morris. At Claire's funeral, the men were each other's crutches. They held hands throughout Claire's service as tears streamed down their faces, and the family actually felt sorry for Malcolm. When he did eventually start to drift away from the Morrises, they didn't really take a bad or any offence to it. They thought that maybe seeing them or being around them might be too raw for Malcolm, it might be too hard for him, because he appeared to be really grieving the death of Claire. In 1995, months following the crash, Malcolm left Scotland for Saudi Arabia, where he started working within a medical software company. Here he would work remotely with people from all over the world, and that's how he met Brenda Grant. Brenda was a divorced mother living in Kansas City, Missouri. The two spoke on a professional level often. That soon turned into personal level conversations, which rolled into romantic ones, and before they knew it, they were talking all day, every day. Malcolm flew over to the US to celebrate Brenda's birthday and spent time with her family, her children, who he seemed to really bond with. Brenda was showered in love, attention, compliments, and she said that as someone who had gone through a divorce, that this romantic attention was nice and she welcomed it, and she really liked Malcolm. She described their time together as magical, and even she herself could not believe how hard and how fast she had fallen in love with him. For me here, the word love bombing comes to mind. He started visiting the US more often to see Brenda, but soon the things that she once loved about Malcolm started to become suffocating. Weekly flowers, constant communication. It was all a little bit too much for Brenda. Everything was going too quickly. She wanted to progress at a more steady pace, which Malcolm just wasn't doing. And so she decided to end their romantic relationship. Sometime after, Barbara was trying to reach Malcolm for professional working purposes. They still had to communicate for that. But on this occasion, she couldn't reach him. This is when she learned from one of her co-workers that he had done a midnight dash. He had disappeared, up and left the company, taking a couple of laptops with him. The next that Brenda Grant heard from Malcolm was in 1997, when he sent her a fax telling her that he was living in New Zealand and that he had married a woman named Felicity. Felicity Drum and Malcolm had met through work within that medical software company, and I imagine he did to Felicity exactly what he did to Brenda: wooed her, love bombed her. He ended up moving from Saudi Arabia to New Zealand to be with Felicity, and he was, I guess, open with her about how he had been married before. His wife had died in a car accident that he survived, and I bet this made Felicity feel sympathetic towards Malcolm. Obviously, she had no idea about what really happened. Felicity took a great liking towards Malcolm, and she described him as very attentive. She also said he was, quote, a generous personality to the point of embarrassment. The two dated for some time. Michael convinced Felicity to move back to the UK with him, which she did. He is starting the pattern again of taking these women away from their families, their friends, their support units. He is isolating them. He wants them all to himself where no one can see them. After Felicity fell pregnant with their son though, she was adamant that she wanted to return back to New Zealand to have this baby and to have the support of her family. And so they headed back under, eventually welcoming a baby boy. The couple would marry in 1997, ready to start the rest of their family life together, and everything seemed normal, happy and perfect until it wasn't. Soon Felicity started to feel unwell. This is her explaining her symptoms that she was feeling.
Episodes would often begin with a feeling of blurred vision or double vision and unsteadiness on my feet. My speech would sometimes become a little bit slurred. I would stagger around as if I was drunk and then would fall into a deep sleep.
Like Claire, Felicity started to feel very fatigued and would sleep for hours on end. She once stated that she had slept for 30 hours solid, completely blacked out. But she noticed that these weren't constant symptoms. They almost had a pattern. She would feel like this more over the weekend when she wasn't supposed to be at work. She started noticing that some of the food Malcolm was feeding her tasted grainy. Some of her drinks prepared by him had a bitter taste, and she even once jokingly said to Malcolm that whatever she was drinking tasted like someone had drugged it. She was so concerned about how sick she was feeling that she actually went to the doctor, who correctly suspected that she was having issues with her liver that would line up with her being drugged. The doctor wanted to look into this more, but Malcolm managed to convince Felicity to just drop it. He was a nurse too, and he would let her know if something was getting out of hand or needed to be looked further into. He would just continually advise her to keep drinking and stay hydrated. But unbeknownst to Felicity, that was what was making her worse because Malcolm continued to drug her. I know that hearing all of that information together in one chunk would probably make you think, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she get further testing? Why is she just sitting on these suspicions? But all of this was happening kind of over a decent period of time. It's not all happening at once. She's not thinking all of these things straight away. Plus, who's going to think that their husband, the man they have just married, the man they have agreed to spend their life with, the man that they have had a child with, would actually be drugging them? If that is something that you think your partner's doing, they need to not be your partner anymore. The couple decided that they wanted to buy a house together, and so Felicity became hyper aware of Malcolm's erratic spending. She didn't need the gifts or the flowers or the expensive meals anymore because they wanted to buy a house. They needed to save every penny that they could. Malcolm promised Felicity that he was going to chip in a hefty amount of money towards this house from him selling a house in Scotland. He told her that he was due like 600k, so believing him, thinking he's got no reason to lie, Felicity went through the whole buying process using her own money. She had already put down quite a substantial amount of money, and as time was going on, Malcolm wasn't getting his money and he started coming up with daily excuses. Felicity started to worry that she was actually going to lose all the money that she had put down, which was a huge portion of her life savings. Every time the topic was brought up to Malcolm about this house sale, about where his money was, he had a new excuse, he had a new reason for the delay, and this is when Felicity started to worry that the money wasn't coming. Maybe it didn't even exist. In February 1999, however, Malcolm was elated to share the news with Felicity that the money had finally came through. The sale had completed, he had the cash, and he wanted to go out and celebrate. He wanted to take his wife and son out for a cutesy, cozy picnic out in the countryside. Felicity, Malcolm, and their son piled into their car and headed out to celebrate. Throughout the drive, Malcolm was urging Felicity to keep hydrated, keep drinking whatever drink he had prepared for her, and this is when Felicity Drum blacked out. The next thing that she remembers was coming out of a deep sleep, groggy, and hearing her phone ringing. When her eyes adjusted to the light, she realised that she was still sat in the car, but she was alone, and in the distance, about 100 metres away, she could make out Malcolm walking away, pushing their son in his buggy. The ringing phone sort of brings her out of that fog slightly, and she realised that it was her father, Edward, who goes by his middle name Brian, on the other end. He told Felicity in an anxious, panicked, almost stressed tone that something had happened. She needed to get to their home straight away, make an excuse to Malcolm that something has come up, say whatever she needs to say, but just get there as quickly as she could. Brian wouldn't tell her on the phone what had gone on, but he couldn't stress the urgency of her getting there as soon as possible, quick enough. Felicity hangs up the phone and steps out of the car and shouts out to Malcolm, who upon hearing her voice, pauses. He slowly turns around and Felicity remembers him appearing shocked at hearing her, shocked that she was awake, but that quickly turned into a face that appeared angry. He stormed back to the car and was almost trying to coax her into going back to sleep. She was unwell and she needed a rest, but Felicity was adamant that no, I'm not going back to sleep. What she needed to do was go to her parents' house right now. He was going to take her and she wasn't going to give in. During the journey to Felicity's parents' house, there was an awkwardness in the air between the couple. When Felicity asked Malcolm why he had left her behind in the car, he said that he didn't want to wake her up and he was going to take the baby for a picnic alone, even though they were all supposed to be out celebrating together. When Malcolm pulls up at the Drums house, he turns to Felicity and he warns her. Her dad is about to spin a whole tale about him, this whole big story and conspiracy, but she must not believe him. What Brian is about to tell her is a whole load of rubbish and she needs to trust him. She needs to have faith in her husband. Malcolm took off in the car before Felicity's parents actually left their house and came down the drive towards him, and once she was inside, she was sat down by her father, who looked like he was shaken. Now, for some time, Felicity had been concerned over her finances and she didn't know where all of her money was going. This was before you could just go on your banking app on your phone and see where everything's going with about 2 or 3 clicks. Brian had taken it upon himself to contact the bank, and what he discovered shook him to his core. Brian discovered that Malcolm had absolutely rinsed Felicity's account. He had completely eaten up almost all of her savings. He would come to discover that Felicity never got bank statements through the post because Malcolm had all of their letters redirected to a private mailbox which no one else had any idea about. If Felicity got a hold of one of her statements, she would have seen what Malcolm was doing. Somehow, Brian or Felicity got access to that mailbox and everything in there told them what Malcolm was planning to do. He had been making inquiries to an estate agent in the UK, in the Cornwall area, looking for a house for himself and his infant son, stating that the two of them were going to be moving back to the UK very soon, but there was no mention of his wife. There were aeroplane tickets and, hauntingly, there were 9 different life insurance policies out on Felicity. She had signed each and every document, only she hadn't. She didn't have a clue about any of these policies, and Malcolm had forged her signature on every single one, making himself the sole beneficiary of what would have been in the millions of dollars upon the death of Felicity.
You tell yourself no one wants your college-era band tees, but on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
After learning that her husband was planning on leaving the country with their son, all of her money, and 9 life insurance policies against her, Felicity Drum came to the horrifying realization that Malcolm was planning to kill her. After learning all of this, she confronted him, and obviously the two got into a very heated argument. She accused him of trying or wanting to kill her, to which he responded, quote, "For God's sake, you would have died happy." And to me, That is basically an admission. Shortly after this, Malcolm Webster fled from New Zealand, and Felicity had gone to the police, but because he had already left, there wasn't a ton that the authorities could do. He had a warrant issued against him for his arrest, so if he ever returned back to New Zealand, he would be immediately arrested, but there wasn't enough against him. There wasn't enough concrete evidence to justify getting an extradition. The evidence that they had that he attempted to murder Felicity was all circumstantial. Felicity really struggled with the feelings of guilt, shame, betrayal, that this man had completely deceived her, completely pulled the wool over her eyes. She had brought this man into her life, her family's life. She had created new life with them in the form of her son, and she felt heartbroken that someone she thought that she knew could have done something like this. But she was grateful to be alive. Malcolm returned to the UK and would spend the next few years living the high life off of Felicity's savings. Obviously, there was no £600,000 from a house sale in Scotland. Eventually, he ended up back in Scotland, either in or near Oban. Here he found work in a hospital once again, probably doing nursing, and this is where he met Simone Banerjee. They met literally through a chance encounter. They were both stood at a photocopying machine, and Malcolm happened to notice Simone was photocopying something to do with an expensive house that she was in the process of buying. Simone was a theatre nurse and her father was a surgeon, so she was very comfortable financially, and Malcolm would come to learn that she had several trust funds, she owned a beautiful home, she had the cars and the yachts, everything. She had the works. To someone who is so desperate for wealth and for money that they're willing to kill for it, Simone became his next target. Malcolm really knew how to appeal to women with his charmy, witty, quote-unquote perfect gentleman persona, and soon he and Simone were dating. He really played on her empathetic, compassionate side because shortly into their relationship, he told her that he had leukemia. But he didn't, and disgustingly, this wasn't the first time that he had faked having cancer or a serious illness. He had a lengthy history of doing this. In order to keep appearances for this, Malcolm would shave off all of his body hair. He physically starved himself so that he dropped the weight and appear gaunt. He convinced Simone to take a life insurance policy out on him, and it's unclear if she ever actually did that or not, but maybe his reasoning was like, well, you have one out on me, so I might as well get one out on you. Being the generous person that she was, Simone moved Malcolm into her home, and she would actually take him back and forth to appointments in a hospital right down in London, where he would walk in, brass in his brass, take pictures of children who were going through leukemia and send them to Simone saying like, this is my friend for the day. Just think about how disgusting that is. This is a fully grown man who has nothing wrong with him. I mean, he definitely does because he's doing all of this horrible stuff. No normal person could do that. But health-wise, he is completely normal, and he is going into these hospitals using these children who were going through a devastating period of their life and almost using them as tools for his lies. While Simone was under the impression that he was sitting inside of this hospital getting chemotherapy, in actuality, after snapping the pictures of the children, he would walk right out the back door and fill that time talking to Brenda Grant. Brenda Grant, the American woman who he dated after moving to Saudi Arabia. They somehow got back in touch. He told her about his fake illness, and behind Simone's back, they had a little romantic break in Paris, going for expensive meals and even kissing on top of the Eiffel Tower. Now, I quickly want to interject to say that I don't believe that Brenda knew about Simone. Prior to the trip, Malcolm was kind of going on at Brenda, being very pushy towards her to make sure she got her insurance. But while they were in Paris, he asked her about it, and she told Malcolm that she didn't bother getting it. And that was the end of that conversation. But his demeanour had changed. After this trip, they never got into contact again. I wonder if he was planning on doing something to Brenda during this trip. In September 2006, Malcolm Webster proposed to Simone Banerjee with a £6,000 engagement ring, and absolutely elated, she said yes. Straight away, the couple began planning their wedding, which included a honeymoon, sailing a transatlantic trip on their yacht. The possibilities of what Malcolm could do in international waters when it's only him and Simone is absolutely terrifying, especially because Simone had included him in her will. He would be the beneficiary of everything that she had in the event of her death. Thankfully, however, by now, unbeknownst to Malcolm, Scotland police had been keeping a close eye on him. Police in New Zealand communicated with the Scottish police about what had happened to Felicity and, thanks to her, highlighted the similarities between what had almost happened to her and what had happened to Claire Morris, Malcolm's first wife. Both women had fell ill shortly after their weddings. They were both driven to remote countryside areas while blacked out, but Felicity was the only one out of the two women to walk away from that. In both of these instances, the only person set to gain from the women's death was Malcolm Webster. Something I completely forgot to mention earlier as well, that's just came back to us, but when Malcolm took Felicity out for that picnic to celebrate his money coming through from his house sale, it was discovered that in the boot of the car there were 2 jerry cans of petrol. And what did Malcolm do to the car that Claire was murdered in? He doused it in petrol. After a lot of convincing, borderline and begging, the Scottish police force reopened Claire's case file. They began by interviewing people who were at the scene of Claire's death, and the lead fireman on the scene had a lot to say. This is what I said earlier I would come back to. This fireman from the off wasn't convinced that the crash was accidental or caused by the wheel sharply turning to avoid collision with a motorbike. On the ground, there were no skid marks from the tyres abruptly changing course. There were no gouges in the grass on the embankment from a sharp turn. There was no spray up of grass or mud or what have you, what you would expect if that had happened. The area around the car actually seemed relatively undisturbed. There was no damage to the embankment, which would have been consistent with the car driving down it at a high speed. The driver's side door was clear and there was space for the door to open up, which it did because Malcolm got out, but the passenger side door was closed and there was nothing that should have prevented it from opening. There was no obstruction there. We only think that it didn't open because Malcolm said that it was jammed, but can you really believe a single word that he's saying, especially when there is no evidence that it was actually jammed? An expert was enlisted to recreate the crash, and no matter what he tried, all different sorts of scenarios, none of them worked. None of them matched what Malcolm had said. The only way that that car ended up crashed against the tree in the position that it was, leaving behind what little damage to the road and embankment that it did, was by the car being driven down slowly, carefully, precisely. Prosecutors knew that this circumstantial evidence wouldn't be enough to charge and guarantee a conviction, and because now so much time had passed, it had been over 10 years at this point, technology had advanced and they hoped that this would be of benefit to them. After learning from the New Zealand police that Malcolm had been drugging Felicity to incapacitate her, they wanted to see if maybe that was the case with Claire. Using a tiny bit of Claire's liver, which had actually been stored away, tests were ran on it, and it confirmed temazepam in her system. There was no reason whatsoever for that drug to be in Claire's system. She was never prescribed it and never known to use it. So that meant the only other explanation was that she was drugged with it. And who is the only person who had the opportunity to do that? After 2 years of investigation, 47-year-old Malcolm Webster was arrested and charged with the murder of Claire Morris, which actually came as a huge shock to Claire's family, Simone, and as a relief for the Drums, who finally felt that justice was going to be served. His trial began in February 2011, and it was one of the longest trials in Scottish history. Several women, including Felicity and Brenda, testified against Malcolm. He too took the stand in his own defence, and he denied any and all of the accusations. The straw that broke the camel's back, however, was the vital evidence that Claire had been drugged. There was no other explanation other than Malcolm had been the one to do it. This, paired with everything that followed, painted a clear, true picture. The jury seemingly thought the same as they deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with their verdicts. They found Malcolm Webster guilty of the murder of Claire Norris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to bigotiously marry Simone to get access to her estate. He was described by prosecutors as a, quote, most cruel, practiced deceiver, and he was handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years to serve. To this day, he denies all of the charges, taking no responsibility or accountability for his actions, and he has never shown remorse. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. You can find photos and updates over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.